Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion topic video. This one is going to be my in-depth thoughts on the two recently announced Avatar comics, Imbalance as our new 3-part series, and then Team Avatar Tales as our one-shot anthology. I covered these obviously a little bit ago when I covered the reveal of them. I gave some of my thoughts there, but obviously I haven't covered the full kind of detailed reveal from Dark Horse that happened just after that. So I'll be covering a little bit more of the official details that have been revealed and going a bit more in depth in my thoughts. So let's start off with Imbalance, which is obviously what we knew about going in. We just didn't have the details that it was Imbalance, and this is what Imbalance is going to be about. So you can see from the description here that we got from Dark Horse, it says, this new 3-part adventure follows Aang, Katara, Sokka and Toph as they return to the Earth and Fire Industries, the factory owned by Toph's father, and Team Avatar find that the once small town of Cranefish is now booming. Expecting a warm welcome, Aang is surprised when their arrival is met with disinterest and even open hostility. At a business council meeting, the reason for the slight becomes clear. A massive Bender versus non-Bender conflict has gripped the town's inhabitants and is threatening to turn violent. So, if you noticed in my initial video, I wasn't like crazy excited when I saw this kind of as the kind of basic description of what Imbalance is going to be about. I'll get into why I'm not like super enthusiastic about this, but I think there's some positives to it in just a second. I think the big positives here are that I have a lot of faith in the creative team that we have. I think Faith Erin Hicks is a really good writer, and I think she's going to do a really good job writing the characters, and probably will do the plot that we have justice. And Peter Wortman, I think, is, based on what we've seen so far, going to be a really, really popular artist once we get to see more of his art. I'm really impressed, and I think most people are very impressed with what they've seen so far. To me, the problem is just the plot premise. And I've seen a lot of different kind of points about this. I've seen some people very excited that like Avatar is finally going to tackle Bender, non-Bender. But I've also seen people like, we already covered that in Korra, and because it was covered in Korra, does that not mean that like Korra taking place so much further after this means that it was the main exploration of that, so we're only going to get a much lighter exploration of this topic here because Korra comes later and tackles the same issue? I think there's still like open kind of ground to cover with the Bender non-Bender topic, but I don't think it's going to be explored in the way we want, because I think just the history of how like the Avatar comics have approached some of these topics just, I think, leads you to believe that more than likely this will get a North and South style exploration of the topic, where they'll lead you to believe probably in the first 2 parts this is a major issue, and then they'll kind of just in part 3 do whatever they can to just make it, it's an ongoing issue, we'll have to look at it, but it's not that big of a deal. And I think the problem is that, okay, we're returning to a cool kind of continuity thing in that like we're exploring the area around the rift. We're going to return to that kind of those sort of locations. The problem is that the rift had 2 other plot points that were also kind of in addition to like just the Earth and Fire refinery and the setup of the first little hint of Bender non-Bender with the bending line and the kind of machinery line. The other plot points that the Rift had that were interesting was Aang's kind of spiritual arc with Yang Chen and, General Old Iron, Lady Tianhai, and then also Toph and her parents, her father in this case. That was a very interesting arc because, that was an ongoing plot point from the series that we kind of were waiting to see get some resolution. So that had the impact, and then the spiritual stuff in the Rift ended up being, I think, some of the best spiritual stuff we've got. I think in Avatar full stop, not just the comics. And I think that's why the series is kind of remembered. not as much for what I think Imbalance is going to be using most of its kind of time for. I think the problem is just that, yeah, we're going to get some fun interactions between the characters here, but are we going to get the interactions that we've kind of been looking for? Because there's some immediate things of like, once again, it doesn't seem like Suki's in play again. It doesn't seem like Zuko's going to be involved in this book. And I think where we ended the last couple of comics, mainly I think Smoke and Shadow, with regards to it kind of ending what I think most fans consider to be the main kind of plot point of the comics, and that being like Azula, Ki learning firebending, that sort of stuff. That's kind of like the big thing that we're waiting to get resolved. And the description for this basically suggesting that that's not going to get potentially any sort of a look in this book is, I think, a little bit of a problem. Now, I don't want to just be immediately like, oh, the new creative team, they have to come in and immediately cover the biggest topic. I get kind of easing them into it and kind of letting them have a book to just kind of not have the stakes be so high, kind of like Gene Yang had, in that the promise came first, and while it did cover some big issues, it wasn't that they started with the search. The search was the second one, and they got it right, and I'm hoping it's something similar here. I hope there's some stakes to this book. I hope that some notable things actually happen. I hope that this doesn't just become basically North and South Mark II, where whatever villain or whatever main issue they have, by the end of the book just kind of fizzles out and isn't really an issue. Because the problem with North and South was that Gilak was actually set up in the first two parts as actually a very interesting villain, creating an actual rift between the North and the South. The problem was that part 3, the way they wrote it, was almost that, like, there is no issue between the North and the South. Gilak's just crazy, so any point he had and anyone who supported him isn't justified at all. They're just the crazy protesters who we can just dismiss and get on with whatever the actual plot we're dealing with is. And there wasn't really all that much in play. It was just Gilak trying to kill people. There's the slight sense that maybe that's going to be the case here. I think the one hope that I really have, and that could be a real positive coming out of this, is if we are dealing with Bender versus non-Bender, it's going to be interesting to see, Aang, Katara, and Toph primarily deal with being disliked potentially for the first time in a while, having pretty much got the hero treatment all the way up until now. Whereas it's now going to place Sokka in this interesting position where he's never directly kind of had an issue of like, I'm against Benders, but he sort of had the idea of like, I'm the weak link of the group because I don't have bending, but obviously the rest of them kind of acknowledge that he has all these other skills that the group couldn't function without. But is that the case for everyone? So we could see Sokka get a little bit more of a focus here, as he's the kind of only non-bender of the team, and see him kind of presenting maybe some of the, maybe helping his friends to understand the non-bender side of things, which I think could be quite interesting, and potentially create the kind of dynamic we didn't really get in Korra, because Asami, her main episode 107, The Aftermath, it was such a focus on her siding with her friends. We didn't really get too much of a focus on Asami being the non-bender of the team as a way to represent the group understanding where the non-benders are coming from. So they could do something with that to, I suppose, make it a little bit more interesting. In that, like, we're going to get a new location here in this town of Cranefish, but it's going to be close to the Earth and Fire Industries. And I think the problem here is, I don't think we know exactly what the location stuff is with regards to how close this is to United Republic or anything like that. So it feels like the general kind of day-to-day plot of the Avatar comic so far has been slowly moving things towards United Republic and getting that big connection to Korra. But they've always stopped short of just making these movements big enough to where, like, it feels like it's going to happen at some point soon. And I'm kind of worried here that this will be maybe just a little bit too isolated, like it's just this random town that's kind of become big, unless they go into a lot of depth in terms of explaining how close Cranefish is to United Republic, and if by the time they decide on the exact landmass for the United Republic, maybe Cranefish is included and it is an actual kind of bigger topic than it was before. Obviously, this is just a very early announcement. The book isn't out until October, so I suspect we'll get a little bit more detailed product description at some point closer to release that will reveal that there probably are some other plot points in play. But I think just right now, it doesn't quite have the impact, just because it feels like the setup for why they're going to this town for like a business council, it seems kind of like a really random way to introduce the bender-non-bender conflict. So I think the pressure that's got to be on Faith Erin Hicks here is just to write it well enough where it doesn't just feel like a copy of Korra. It's Avatar's own exploration of the topic, while also, I think, being meaningful enough that, like, here's our first Avatar comic in like a year, because it's been a long time since the end of North and South, and justifying the wait and having a good comic basically on the return. So there's a lot of stuff I think that has to kind of come into play here. Obviously, part 2 and 3, they could do a lot of crazy stuff. They could introduce Azula. They could introduce Zuko into the comic if they really, really wanted to. But it doesn't seem like this is the comic to potentially do it in. If they're dealing with bender-non-bender, I think Azula complicates things too much to have this be, I think, the exploration of Azula that we want. If they used her in this book, it feels like this is just using Azula as a villain again, rather than, I think, us really wanting to have the big character kind of movement for her. So that's my thoughts on Imbalance at the moment. I'm excited for the book, but I'm primarily excited to see the new creative team in action, to see the new artist, to see Faith Erin Hicks' writing style. The plot, I hope there's a bit more to it than I suspect. There are, I think, obviously will be, but I hope there's meaningfulness to it as well, and it's not just a North and South where the main takeaways are going to be a couple of nice character moments, which we can almost guarantee are going to happen, but, you know, how many are we going to get here, and is the plot going to actually matter in this book? So that's my thoughts on Imbalance. So moving on to Team Avatar Tales. Obviously much more positive about this, because I think this is the sort of book that we needed. It was a kind of a surprise announcement. We didn't expect this to come with the reveal of what the 2018 Avatar's name is, but they did it, and I think they kind of hit all of the points they needed to with this book. Number one, it's going to collect the other Free Comic Book Day books that haven't been collected since. So the Free Comic Book Day books are obviously relatively exclusive if you want a physical copy of them. Because if you're not near a comic book store, if you don't have a local comic book store, if your local comic book store doesn't participate in Free Comic Book Day, and then even if you attend, you're not guaranteed to get a copy because potentially your comic book store only got a couple of copies of it in. They're pretty exclusive comics if you want hard copies of. So it's a really cool thing that Dark Horse are finally just putting out a mass release book that's going to contain, as far as we're aware, the 3 Free Comic Book Day books, Rebound, Shells, and Sisters. So that immediately confirms about 30 of the pages of Team Avatar Tales. But we'll get into the description that we have here. So, Avatar The Last Airbender Team Avatar Tales is a one-shot anthology of stories from the Avatarverse featuring beloved characters brought to life by a cast of all-star creators. It also features never-before-collected stories from Free Comic Book Day publications, and also debuts several brand new stories. Fans can journey along with Team Avatar as they rescue a pumpkin farmer waylaid by monsters, go undercover in the Fire Nation, help an old rival with a hair-raising problem, and reflect on what it means to save the world. Featuring the work of Jean Llewellyn Yang, Faith Erin Hicks, Carla Speed McNeil, David Shade, Sarah Getter, and more. This anthology features stories both hilarious and heartwarming. This beautiful cover is by artist Sarah Kippen. This obviously there's a lot to be positive about here. This is going to be just over a third of the length of the Lost Adventures, which is the previous kind of anthology kind of one shot we've had before. That obviously is like around 220 pages, give or take. This one's going to be, it says 80 pages, but like 72 of the pages are going to feature actual story. As I said, the free Comic Book Day books are going to take up about 27 or 30 of those pages, which leaves in or around 40 to 45 pages for new stories. And obviously we know a couple of them, as it says here. There's going to be one which is Rescue a Pumpkin Farmer Waylaid by Monsters. I believe the artists confirmed on their Twitters. I think the Pumpkin Farmer one is going to be written by Dave Shade. I think Sarah Getter on Twitter confirmed that she's doing a story featuring Toph and the Boulder, and the fact that the Boulder has like a cute cat gator, which could be a fun story. And then the other ones we get are Team Avatar are going to go undercover in the Fire Nation, help an old rival with a hair-raising problem, and reflect on what it means to save the world. Very interesting stuff there, because it seems like all of these stories are going to be set after the end of the series, which is very interesting in that they're going to obviously have to potentially place them in between the comics that we've got so far. But some of the interesting things here are that after the end of the series, why did they have to go undercover in the Fire Nation? Now, I don't think they maybe have to stick completely to every story being set afterwards, but it would be funny if they came up with some reason where the group had to be undercover in the Fire Nation. It would be funny if that was another like Wang Fire story, but I don't really know what they're going to do. The help an old rival with a hair-raising problem is an interesting one, because I was thinking about this and I'm just kind of like, what characters would you consider like to be rivals of the team? And like, the initial one I'd go to is like Jet, but Jet is dead. And then after that, it's kind of like Teo, but he's more of their friend than a rival. Similarly with like Haru, which I think is the obvious go-to because of the mustache and the mention of hair. It's kind of like, but he's their friend now. So, I don't know. The only other ones that I can kind of think of are kind of like, is it like Mei or Ty Lee as like enemies who've just very recently become their friends? Or is it or could this actually be the Boulder story, and like his cat gator has hair problems, or he has hair problems related to the cat gator? I'm not entirely sure, but that could be fun depending on what character they choose. Reflect on what it means to save the world. That's obviously going to be one of our more kind of heartwarming stories with the group. I suppose potentially for one of the first times, like just talking about like what they accomplished over the course of the series, which we didn't really get outside of just, I think at the start of The Promise, like Katara kind of mentioning like, she's proud of Aang for how far he came and that sort of thing. But that's kind of about it. So that could be very fun depending on how they do it. And just in general, I think this is exactly the sort of book that we need. I hope they continue to do more of these, especially now that we know that this is kind of a shorter book than maybe The Lost Adventures. It would be really cool if every year or every 2 years they did something like this, an anthology. Because, of course, we're eventually going to hit the point where we're going to need a book to collect the Korra free comics in, and it would make sense that we also would need some kind of anthology style stories for Korra. So I could see them doing a Korra style book for this, another Avatar one, and it's just a cool way to expand out the amount of comics that they're doing every so often. The other bonus of this is that we're going to get to see a lot of different writers, we're going to get to see a lot of different artists and art styles, as well as, I suppose, different tones of story, which I think is exactly what we need, because some of the three-parter stories tend to have a very kind of samey kind of tone and feel to them, because each book is 72 pages, there's 3 parts, it's, it's a super set amount of pages, so it feels like the pacing of all of the 3-part stories are all the same, even if the content is very good or if the content isn't so great. The pacing always sort of feels somewhat similar. So getting different page counts here, getting maybe just focuses on one character in more of a humorous setting or a more heartfelt setting. This is exactly what we need, because just look back at the Lost Adventures for how impressive some of the stories were. The one with kind of Katara set in between book 2 and 3, that was a very emotional story. The Bridge, I believe that one was. The kind of Love as a Battlefield was a kind of Katang centric one. You had like Combustion Man on a Train as more of a kind of like, that is a crazy name for a story, and it's actually a quite fun story. There's the kind of Private Wang Fire story in it as well, and all these kind of other ones. Like Relics is actually one of the few mentions of details about the Air Nomad genocide we get is in the story Relics, and so on. Divided We Fall, I think, is the largest one in the Lost Adventures, and that's quite a fun story, sort of set in the swamp, or a different type of swamp, involving an orphanage. But you can sort of see, like, just based off of that, the amount of options that they have with this, especially if they're going to set all the stories post end of the series, and what you can do. I suppose my big hope for this is that they kind of, Suki's included in a couple of these stories as well, and because this is becoming a pretty big issue now of just, it seemed like everything official, forgetting that like Suki is technically considered a member of the team, and she's just, and then it feels like most of the official creators considering her just like a side character, when I think the fans consider her now to be basically one of the main cast. But the difference between the fans' perception of Suki and the creators is definitely becoming a bit of an issue. So hopefully the Suki stuff is fixed and she's included in Imbalance, and she's included potentially in some of the Team Avatar Tales stories, because it feels weird looking at, Team Avatar Tales, which is clearly the characters towards the end of the series were set after the series, and Suki's not there. It's just kind of slap in the face to Suki fans. But yeah, that's my thoughts on these two comics. Once again, the release dates are that Team Avatar Tales is coming out September 5th, and Imbalance Part 1 is coming out October 10th. But that's my thoughts on the two books. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are going to be on the two books. I'll end by saying probably tomorrow I'll get back to doing the Korra, Airspeed's Korra rewatch. I think When Extremes Meet is the next one I need to do, so I'll do my best to get that video review out either tomorrow or the day after. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.